$1 million. That's how much it costs to have a game trailer be featured to the millions of people watching the yearly Game Awards ceremony. However, during the final game reveal of 2025's award show, usually the moment everyone is waiting for, we'd see the showrunner preparing us to witness a new revolutionary multiplayer game made by an independent, self-published studio. And you know what? He wasn't exaggerating. In fact, the game was so revolutionary that it managed to get bombarded by negative reviews from the moment it launched, proceeded to lose over 90% of its player base within less than a week after launch, fired 80% of its staff in barely 2 weeks after launch, and shut down the entire studio as well as the game itself in less than 45 days.
Did he say 89% of his staff?
After launch. The story of Highguard is one of utter mismanagement, blatant lies about its independent status, and uncontrollable hubris that spanned over half a decade of development. I mean, it was such a disaster that it most likely burned through tens of millions of dollars of funding, with some even theorizing that the total amount could have been over 200 million. So how did these developers that worked on nothing but industry-defining blockbusters over the years fail so miserably?
Yeah.
And why did one of the most influential figures in gaming decide to stake his entire reputation all for the sake of peddling Highguard harder than any other game in his career? Well, as you might expect, the story is very messy and has a lot of details. So, without further ado, let's do this. Alright, so to really understand the disaster of Highguard, we actually have to go all the way back to 1995 when the Electronic Entertainment Expo, otherwise known as E3, would launch. Back then, video games were nowhere near close to how big they are today, and this expo was mostly used to showcase to publishers and, well, business people certain aspects of the video game industry. Throughout the years that followed, though, gaming would start to become more and more profitable and mainstream. E3 would benefit from this directly, and it would become the biggest video game related event every single year in parallel to its European counterpart, which was Gamescom. It would consistently be held in the summer of every year, more specifically in the month of June. One of the biggest highlights of E3 was during the peak of the console wars when you had PlayStation and Xbox rent out spaces a few feet away from each other as they were presenting the next generation consoles that would define gaming for the next few years. This is what E3 truly was all about. However, as you might know by now, all good things come to an end, and E3 unfortunately was no exception. For many people, the end of E3 was due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but in other ways, one could say that it began prior. From the day this expo was created, the only people who had access to E3 were industry insiders or press. Regular people had no access, but E3 2019 changed that. This allowed 15,000 regular people, non-industry insiders, to buy tickets that were priced at over $100 so that they could, for the first time, join in on the fun. This showed that E3 was looking for more ways to make money. It simply wasn't sustainable to run this based purely on industry insiders. In 2020, the public passes were going to go from 15,000 to 25,000, showing a real need of more ways to make money. However, due to the pandemic, everything came to a halt. Unlike other conventions or events that brought their content online or remote, E3 decided to pretty much kill everything. 2020 was the only year since 1995 that had nothing to do with the Electronic Entertainment Expo. Now look, it's no secret, there are certain developers like Nintendo who've been holding their own presentations every single year since 2014. E3 shutting down in 2020 only made it more clear. Nintendo Direct is not only here to stay, it should be the primary source of Nintendo news. Xbox, who would usually reserve their biggest announcements for E3, would take a page out of Nintendo's playbook, inaugurating the Xbox Games Showcase, which has been, since that year, their main way to showcase their biggest announcements. PlayStation would do the exact same thing with the State of Play. In 2021, E3 was still not held physically, but this time they held it remotely with anyone able to join. They were hoping to return to an in-person event by 2022, but those plans were also completely scrapped, and there wasn't even a digital event. It was just like 2020. They were finally meant to bring back E3 physically in 2023, but due to the lack of interest by publishers who had already spent so much making their own shows, they just decided to flat out cancel it. This wasn't just the console makers making their own shows, you had developers making their own shows too, like EA Play, the Ubisoft conference, the Square Enix conference. E3 was essentially made redundant, and the pandemic only accelerated that. I truly think that this was where the world was headed anyway. Problem is though, now you had multiple different conferences to look forward to for different publishers and games, and that in turn left a huge vacuum for any mid-sized or indie-sized studio. Where were they meant to talk about their games? Well, that's where Geoff Keighley comes in. Look, Geoff, when it comes to the video game industry, has been a veteran for a very long time. If you followed any gaming news or events, you must have definitely seen his face at least once, whether it be E3, Gamescom, or any high-profile gaming-related event. His story goes back decades, even though the guy for some reason never ages. He was truly able to put his name on the map when he was the only journalist who was present with Valve as they were launching Half-Life 2. Taking you behind the scenes in a studio, Valve, which is known to be quite secretive to the public. He was also involved in his fair share of controversies like the whole Dorito-gate saga, when he presented the Halo partnership with Mountain Dew and Doritos, which led to this famous picture. Fundamentally though...
Wait, you guys mentioned that in chat. What was that about? This guy doesn't look like he ages. He's a vampire. Dorito man.
To Geoff, his goal has always been to give gaming what it deserves, and that's to put it on par with other creative avenues, like movies. Both his parents were executives at IMAX. This meant that he constantly attended things like the Oscars. From an early age, he wondered why video games didn't have an equivalent to the Oscars, even though they were a medium that deserved it. In 2014, he would do something ridiculous, insane even, which is creating a new award show for video games with money out of his own pocket. He refused to fundraise it because he said it would be too awkward. He wanted to put his money where his mouth was. The reason why he was insane was because throughout the years, there were many other attempts to do this. These gaming awards, none of them would really stick. But over the years, he did exactly that. It actually stuck and has now become an integral part of video games. However, as E3 shut down, he also saw another opportunity, filling the void that it left. This is when he would launch the Summer Game Fest. It took place in the same month that E3 took place in. It wasn't rocket science. It aimed to fill the exact void left over by E3's cancellation. This meant that Geoff and his production team would not only head the prestigious Game Awards in December, but would also have another event called the Summer Game Fest in the summer. Both of these events would have game reveals, and both of them would be watched by hundreds of thousands of people expecting to see games that will revolutionize the space. When it came to the Game Awards in particular, over the years, it had gotten so successful with such a high, consistent viewership that by 2025, it was reported that if you want to showcase a 3-minute trailer during the awards, it would cost you over $1 million, almost doubling the prices from 2024. And of course,
that's like... Dude, that's like the equivalent of Super Bowl ads, except those are probably even pricier.
It goes without saying, the most valuable slot in the entire award show is the final game that's shown. In show business, you always save the best for last. You want people to keep watching. And so, this is why it was so shocking to the world that for the Game Awards 2025, with such high prices, the game deemed most valuable in the entire show, the one shown at the end, would be something they had never heard of before, Highguard. And this is how it would be presented. Take a look for yourself.
You know, sometimes our last reveal at the Game Awards is a teaser for something years and years away. But not tonight. Our final world premiere comes from 61 members of the team that built Apex Legends and Titanfall. 4 years ago, the principals founded a new independent studio with the hopes of pushing the shooter genre forward with a new original game. They've done it in complete secrecy, which is even more amazing because the game is very deep into development. The power of independent, self-published studios to push this medium forward is a growing and I think positive theme in our industry. And so tonight, you're not only going to get the announcement of the game, but also your first look at the gameplay. I've played it, and after you see this trailer, I think you're going to want to as well. Welcome to Highguard.
Yeah, 1,200 likes on the video, 17,000 dislikes. Now, I'm not going to show you the gameplay just yet. You need even more context to understand just how ridiculous everything he said truly was. Prior to this Game Awards show, Geoff would tweet coordinates, okay, on Twitter, just randomly, that would lead you to this weird statue in the middle of the Mojave Desert. It was an enigma. For weeks, people had no idea what it was. This was the main mystery of the Game Awards, and that game ended up being none other than Divinity, made by Larian Studios, the same people who made Baldur's Gate 3. To many, this was the biggest game of the Game Awards. This was meant to be the final game to be shown, right? The biggest event of that day. Instead, what people got was a game they never heard of before, that looked fairly generic, that didn't really seem to make it clear what it was about. Geoff had hyped this up like a revolutionary title, but it looked like any other game you could find on Steam right now.
Pretty crazy, that's right. Highguard launches in just 7 weeks on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox. It is insanely fun to see, fun to play, as you saw in that trailer. And now it's time for our final award. Last year, Astrobot.
So there it was, the biggest game of this prestigious award show, coming out in 7 weeks and seemingly out of nowhere. So as you would expect, people put on their investigative fedoras to determine where this independent
You got paid for it or what? When he said from creators of Titanfall was when my heart stopped, only to fall like a stone in a pond a second later. Oh my god.
Publishing developer, as Geoff described it, came from. And that investigation would only lead to more confusion and suspicion. You see, the studio behind Highguard, Wildlight Entertainment, made their first announcement to the public that they exist back in the beginning of 2023. Here we can see the design and creative director of Wildlight making a tweet saying, "What have I been up to over the last year anyway? Working hard on a game with amazing people who I trust very much. Today we announce Wildlight Entertainment, our new studio. I've never been happier, prouder, and hyped for the game we're working on." As we can see in his Twitter bio, he had worked on Apex Legends, Titanfall 1 and 2, Modern Warfare 2, and Call of Duty World at War, to name a few. So these are very well-regarded games in the industry. This is when the studio would also create its Twitter account saying, "Hello world. We're very excited today to announce our new game studio, Wildlight Entertainment. We've got big dreams of creating an epic shooter IP." And here we can see a Zoom call of 22 different staff members that were working at that studio as early as 2023. It wouldn't even take a day for game publications to start reporting on this. Former Apex Legends, Titanfall developers create new studio, Wildlight Entertainment. The studio head would be Chad, someone who was at Respawn Entertainment for around 11 years. He was also the ex-game director for Apex Legends, a game that had, well, made a lot of money. So no wonder many publications were talking about it. You have a bunch of ex-Infinity Ward and ex-Respawn Entertainment developers that made their studios a lot of money, now forming their own. And so far, other than this very limited array of information we have from 2023, the only other thing we knew was from Geoff Keighley himself, calling it a self-published independent studio. Even though their own company LinkedIn page as early as 2023 would say Wildlight Entertainment is a new, fully funded entertainment studio, never really specifying where they got their money from. In fact, what I find interesting is that the website linked on their LinkedIn is wildlightentertainment.com. And when you go there, it says, "We're under construction. Please check back for an update soon." It's not even wildlight.gg, which actually works. But this little piece of mismanagement aside, Wildlight was about to face a world of hurt that they could have never predicted after their reveal at the Game Awards. You see, back in 2024, Sony launched Concord, a multiplayer shooter that was meant to be live service that cost over $400 million, and that was such a disastrous flop.
Yeah.
It shut down in under 2 weeks.
Like, I'm not even that knowledgeable about video games, but I know how much this was a disaster.
I mean, it resulted in a studio that Sony had bought to shut down immediately afterwards. This made many people ask the question, who asked for this game to begin with? Ever since then, whenever someone comes out with a newly announced live service multiplayer game, they're placed under 1,000 times more scrutiny due to this. And while I'm sure the Highguard developers, after working in secrecy for so long, were so excited about the Game Awards reveal, what they could have probably never expected is that people were making direct comparisons of their game to Concord, the worst thing you can ever hope to happen in this day and age. Based on this uninspired generic gameplay they showed during the Game Awards, even with Geoff's insane hype towards it, it seemed like it was going to be nothing more than a Concord 2.0, any developer's worst nightmare. But you know what didn't help at all? Highguard's social media page would tweet almost immediately after the trailer would come out during the Game Awards, saying, "What a night! We'd like to extend a big thank you to Geoff Keighley and the Game Awards. We have so much in store for you when the game launches on January 26th, and can't wait to welcome everyone into the world of Highguard. We'll see you next year, Wardens." Okay, this is a post you would expect them to make after the big reveal, sure.
Yeah.
You know what else you would expect though? Them continuing to tweet up until release day. Except they didn't. They literally disappeared, to the point where many gaming publications, including Forbes, would start making articles about how they went MIA right after the Game Awards. No new videos on their YouTube page, no new tweets on their Twitter account, nothing. Radio silence, and the game was meant to come out 3 weeks from then. This article was written on January 6th. The game was going to come out in 20 days. 6 days later, Paul Tassi from Forbes would write another article
Because there's like no hype to it.
January 12th, titled The Highguard Mystery, 2 weeks to launch in complete silence. Now look, to be fair, this could have been a genius marketing move. Everyone was talking about this game, saying how they probably closed down or declared bankruptcy right before launch. However, in my opinion, you'd be naive to think that there's no such thing as bad publicity all the time. No, there are exceptions. This isn't the Wolf of Wall Street. When your game is being called by so many people Concord 2, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy unless you're there to stop it. Highguard wasn't there to stop it. In fact, a new theory is popping up now, the fact that they weren't even going to release anymore. And just as you thought that things couldn't get worse so shortly before the game was meant to launch, things got even weirder. The senior writer of gaming and tech at VentureBeat, Imran Khan, would come out with the news. Highguard did not pay a single penny to be featured in the most valuable spot in the Game Awards spotlight. That's right, the same Game Awards that charges $1 million for 3 minutes gave its most valuable spot during the entire show for free. On January 17th, 2026,
Why? Were they like... Was he an investor or something? The MC of the show?
9 days before the game was meant to come out, Forbes would also confirm this, citing 2 separate sources that reached out, confirming, yes, they didn't pay a single penny. Geoff just really liked the game and offered it to them. So there we were, 9 days away from release, and this bombshell dropped. Is this Concord 2.0? Did they go bankrupt before the game even releases? And why the hell did Geoff give his most popular spot in the show to this very generic looking game? The gaming community was truly baffled at something that had never really occurred before. And just as the discourse was running rampant on every piece of social media you can imagine.
But how could he like the game that much? He hadn't even played it yet.
Something completely unexpected ended up happening. And that's Highguard finally breaking their silence barely 3 days before release. On January 22nd, 2026, Geoff Keighley would tweet, "Just 4 days until the launch of Highguard on Monday on Steam and consoles." Bear in mind, up until this point, Highguard had said nothing since the Game Awards reveal.
Wait, why is he tweeting for them? Like, he looks like their social media manager. Why aren't they tweeting from their account? Looks like Gen Z Karen. True! He really believed in the game, so he did play a little.
Geoff was single-handedly carrying this game's entire marketing, and many of the comments are pretty much saying this. Paul Tassi, the same guy who wrote those Forbes articles, would literally say, "Have you heard anything? Like, is the developer still here? Did they not go bankrupt?" And it would only be on January 23rd, 2026 that Highguard would finally make some sort of social media announcement, 3 days before their release, saying, "Tune in on Monday, January 26th at 10 a.m. PT for the Highguard launch showcase. Here, we'll share an in-depth look at Highguard direct from the studio, featuring a full gameplay deep dive, year 1 plans, and much more." As you can imagine, many of the comments were roasting them, grilling them.
Bro finally remembered the password was funny.
That this might have just been a very good marketing strategy. The Highguard account would then begin a countdown, posting every day up until release, saying 1 day remains. And you know what? Looking at some of these 420 replies, there was some excitement brewing. You know, people were very curious to see why was Geoff talking about this game so much. And God, talking about it was an understatement. The guy couldn't stop talking as if they held his family hostage. On January 23rd, he would just tweet this image randomly saying, "Highguard, January 26th at 10 a.m. PST, signaling when it would release." Someone in the replies would say, "Thanks, Geoff," to which Geoff would say, "See you online," it's a special one. The next day he'd post a badge saying, I first went hands-on last summer and had so much fun with Highguard. Now it's your turn on Monday. Curious what everyone thinks. On that same day, he would post a GIF saying, in 48 hours, I'll be accepting your apologies. So when Highguard comes out. On January 26th, when the game would come out, he'd post a screen cap of a Polygon article. The title was, Highguard isn't dead on arrival. In fact, after 4 hours, I'm convinced it's one of the best new shooters in years. This didn't really mean much though, because Polygon thought Dragon Age the Veilguard was actually good, along with Concord. 1 minute later, after that Polygon post, he would make another post with 4 different images of the game saying screenshots from Highguard, now live and free. Look, I think you get the point I'm trying to make here. This guy was tweeting and talking about this game more than their official account. And when I say this guy, I mean one of, if not the most influential voice in video gaming. For some reason, he decided to stake his entire reputation on this game being a success, being fun, being good. So much so that he gave it his most valuable spot in his show. At this point, there was 3 possibilities. He had a financial stake in this game, his family was being held hostage by Highguard devs, or he just genuinely wanted to help. Regardless of those possibilities though, he just staked his entire reputation on this game, and that meant something. Some of the biggest streamers and content creators would check out this game as soon as it would release. Yes, of course some would be sponsored, that was Highguard's social media strategy, similarly to Apex Legends, we'll get more into that later, but let's not pretend that they wouldn't have played it anyway, because god, the curiosity would kill you. Why is this guy who's so influential in the video game industry staking everything for it? It must be good, right? Well actually it was... Dude, it was fucking mid. The trailer turned out to actually do it a lot of justice. It was generic as hell. Geoff's efforts would make it so that the game had 100,000 concurrent players on release. That's a crazy number. However, even Geoff's endless marketing wouldn't prove good enough if your game just doesn't cut it, and it didn't. The player count would fall off very quickly. Almost a day after the game would come out, Geoff would tweet, thoughts on Highguard so far. This tweet has over 7.5 million views.
Oh my god, Asmongold bro, ...
900 replies. It was safe to say that he didn't really get the response he was looking for. I'm sure he was hoping for, Geoff, you're right. Sorry, you proved me wrong. But instead, he got the absolute opposite. And of course, one of the biggest questions being asked at the time was, why did he shill this game so damn hard knowing that it's nothing special? Someone would at Geoff saying, hey Geoff, I was wondering if you financially backed Highguard during development or owned some percentage of the company. Obviously you don't have to answer, just curious if you have any incentive with Wildlight Entertainment if they hit certain earning thresholds. To which he would reply with, lol, absolutely not. This meant that the 3 possibilities I listed earlier now we're down to 2. Either Highguard developers held his family hostage, or he genuinely was just trying to help. Well, as I mentioned, even his help wouldn't be enough if the game wasn't up to par. On Steam, the game would open up with overwhelmingly negative reviews, with only 17% of them being positive. The main complaints were poor performance, uninspired art direction, and just tedious gameplay. Look, if I had to explain to you the purpose of a game, like let's say Call of Duty or Apex Legends, it would take me 10 seconds. Like for example, in Apex Legends, you have multiple operators, each with different abilities. You land on a big map and your goal is to loot gear to survive, hunting down other players and being the last team to live.
Yeah.
Done. Yeah, well, just to explain the gameplay loop of Highguard, GameSpot made a YouTube short. This was them trying to explain it as fast and simply as possible. You want to know how long the short is? 1 minute, 48 seconds. They needed almost 2 minutes to explain to you the gameplay loop of Highguard. That already says a lot to the complexity and tediousness of this game. Look, overall, it doesn't take a genius to understand from their trailer. You had multiple wardens, characters you could play with different abilities. You and your team would also vote on a base. There was multiple types of bases that you could start with. The whole point of this game was to fortify your base and attack the other base. You had to find a sword on a map which would allow you to destroy the shield of the enemy base, and then you'd be the attacker, they'd be the defender. And in order to win, you'd have to destroy multiple things in that base of theirs, their generators, their power, etc., etc. That's it really in an utter nutshell. Now look, in theory, this might sound fun, but there were some things that just didn't really make much sense that really added to the tediousness. This map was absolutely massive, and yet it was only 3v3. That to many people
What?
didn't make much sense. These aspects of tediousness as well as uninspired gun gameplay, coupled with the fact that everything looked generic, a McDonald's type of art direction, as you might say, like as if you bought a bunch of different assets from a marketplace, gave the impression to many people that this was some sort of a Frankenstein game. Like they just took a bunch of different things they developed over a couple of years and just shipped it together just to get something out for people to play. And even though the game was free, the game was bleeding players like it had been struck in an artery. As of now, even game journalists found this game to be lacking, uninspiring, giving it a 63 out of 100 Metacritic score, but the real pain came from the players, 2.6 out of 10 from almost 300 user ratings. Steam currently has over 30,000 reviews, and it's sitting on mixed, with only 46% of them having something positive to say.
Oh, so it went up? That's surprising. I feel like this is a 6v6 map. But also, okay, doing a balanced map is extremely difficult and it needs to be like beta tested a lot.
The day after release, Geoff would acknowledge that things weren't going that well for him. He'd jokingly say, opening X this morning, while linking an image of Flynn Rider from Tangled surrounded by many different swords. This tweet would again gain a lot of exposure, 5 million views, 47,000 likes, 2,000 replies. And again, as you might imagine, a lot of them were not positive. Many people in the industry would take notice of this, and some would choose to speak out against it. You'd have the vice president and co-founder of Epic Games say, "It's downright horrible," referring to all the hate this new game was getting. Especially a free game from a new studio. Just so sad. This is a hobby for people they should approach with joy, not hatred. Of course, many of these 200 replies would not have positive things to say. One of the tweets on this topic that will get the most attention would be from Sven Vinke, the studio head of Larian, the creators behind Baldur's Gate 3, saying, "I don't like people shitting on things others have created. Putting something out into the world makes you vulnerable, and that alone deserves respect, even if you dislike the creation. It's easy to destroy things, it's a lot harder to build them. The best critics understand this. Even when they're being critical, they do their best not to be hurtful."
Yeah, I feel like that could really be applied to my neuro video. He's right.
Again, as you might expect, the top replies, the most liked ones at least, were not in agreement with him. In just one day, Highguard would lose half its player count. Another day would pass by, they would lose yet another 50% of their player count. It seemed like with every passing day, thousands of players were leaving. But hey, it seemed like they weren't going to let that get in the way of their plans. Shortly after the game would come out, they would tweet, "Here's a look at the Highguard Year 1 game plan. Episode 2 arrives in 2 weeks. Each episode is 2 months long. Content shown is..."
What was wrong? There was nothing really wrong. It was just a bunch of nitpicks, and this one clipper named Staz like basically hate watched my entire video. Like he pulls up the video and it's already disliked, uploaded the react same day as my video came out too, which was against my react rules. And yeah, it was just not super fun to have somebody from the community roasted like that.
Free for all players, and they would have plans up until December 2026. Every 2 months you'd have a new warden, a new character to play. Every 4 months you'd have a new map. Ranked mode was coming soon. You'd have new weapons, new raid tools, new limited time game modes. I mean, it seemed like they had things figured out. It seemed like they were here for the long run, regardless if players were leaving or not. It also seemed like they were very open for feedback and weren't afraid to try new things. On January 30th, the #1 marketer of this game, Geoff Keighley, would tweet out, "Highguard has added a 5v5 raid mode to the game, playable today." Now, did that help with player retention? Yes, a few thousands would play, realize that the game just wasn't for them, like definitively, and then it would proceed to lose many more players, reaching below 10,000 on the 3rd of February, and only dwindling more since then. By February 12th, the game would be down to 3,100 players on Steam, and with every passing day they kept losing hundreds more. Even with their 1-year planning strategy and their willingness to accept feedback, it seemed like the Conquer 2 prophecy was coming true no matter how hard they tried to fight it. This would be directly confirmed to us because in barely just 2 weeks after the launch of the game, the majority, not just a small chunk, the majority of the employees working at Wildlight Entertainment would get laid off.
Jesus.
On February 12th,
But I
2026.
still don't understand why they did not market the game at all. Like, they had this guy market for them, right? But without him, they'd have nothing.
The game was down to a mere 3,000 players on Steam and no doubt a few thousand on consoles as well. The Twitter account Shinobi602 would tweet out, Highguard developer Wildlight Entertainment has seemingly laid off most of its staff, quoting a LinkedIn post from an employee, in which they said, unfortunately, along with most of the team at Wildlight, I was laid off today. The LinkedIn post would go deeper, saying, this one really stings as there was a lot of unreleased content I was really looking forward to that I and others designed for Highguard. This person in particular was a senior level designer with 7 years of experience in the AAA game space. It has now been 3 weeks, and as far as I could tell from his profile, he's still looking for a job. Around the same time, another employee would make
but
a Twitter
the job market's cooked. So now apparently all the CVs are made with AI, so they're like super optimized. And like you should just straight apply at this point. Everybody's counseling you to lie because everybody is. And the consequences to lying are very tiny. And then on top of that, these jobs that are posting online, they are reading the CVs with AI. So it's like AIs reacting to AIs. And then some people are saying that there's some job interviews that are now conducted by AI. So apparently the best way to land a job right now is to just walk in or call the headquarters and say, hey, I'm calling in to schedule my job interview. Like, just pretend you got a job interview. Yes. AI HR filters fighting AI generated CVs. Jobs have changed. Yep. That's how you got your job? No fucking way. Like, you walked in or you called them. Yep, I got an engineering degree gathering dust. Wow. But yeah, apparently you're just, you gotta be in the first wave because the recruiters, after one day, they're so overwhelmed with job application that they only read like day one. They'll pick one on top of the pile. But the best way to get on a job is to know somebody. You don't have to be close to them, nothing. Just have them refer your name. That's it. Just get them to say, I know somebody and they can do the job. Make friends with people who can get you work. It's not just what you know, it's also who you know. Oh yeah, absolutely. That's actually how my friend, I saw him after multiple years. This is a friend I made online years ago, but he lives in my area and I haven't seen him in years. And he's like the happiest I've ever seen. He's making mad money. His friend got him to the job and they just liked his dedication. And then he just kept on learning how to do shit. Like, he didn't know how to do anything, but they just taught him. They just liked how proactive he was. And then he just kept on moving up in the ladder. It's better for me to do remote freelancing, like video editing. Yeah, the gig, that's called like gig market. That one is tough because there's a lot of competition, but if you get your clientele, you can do well. I was seasonal, then they liked how I worked and I stayed. Yeah, because so many people don't work well, or they make it seem like they don't want to be there. So it's very easy to actually stand out. The gig economy, yeah. Yeah, and everybody's got a degree. Okay, so the other problem is that everybody that's applying for a job right now are people that got laid off from their job, so they already have experience. So if you're coming out of college with only a degree, you're fucked because you're competing against these guys who have work experience. And why would they ever pick you against somebody who's already proven that they have the experience and for the same salary too? It's a very difficult market right now. So you know what, just fucking lie on your resume. Like, if you don't have any experience, just pretend you do. I'm telling you, like, you can learn most of the stuff on the job. College doesn't teach you shit when it comes to life experience. Yeah, no matter how talented someone is, people who are easy to work with will always be prioritized. One of the girls I used to work with, my assistant, she is such a joy. Like, she is just somebody that whoever it is, even it doesn't matter how annoying they are, she will talk to them. And she's always going to be in a good mood. It's like she's on antidepressant all the time. And everybody loves her. She is booked all year long. Like, I'm calling her sometime to work with her. She doesn't even have time for me anymore. And she started off with me. She's always booked. Everybody always thinks of her. They think, she's doing the thing that I told you about. They think, oh my God, who can I have for this job? they think of her, oh yeah, she can do it. She's good and she's a good time. You need to build connection colors about what you know and but who you know. Yeah. And also that's even more powerful if you live in Europe, because it's a very I don't know, everybody knows each other in Europe. I don't know why. But for example, I feel like when I was in France, I was only like 2 people away from knowing somebody that works in a big fashion house or something like that, or that works for a big company. So you're like you're only 2 contacts away from getting your foot in the door somewhere. But I feel like America and Canada, it's like people are more isolated and more distant, so it doesn't work as well. You should still like try to. That's why you need to give everybody a chance in life. You need to give everybody a fair shake. Don't ever just discredit people based on their, I don't know, appearance or first impression. Sure, that has gotten me burned at time in the content creation field, but I say in real life, it's really helped me, because you never know who that person will end up being, who they'll end up knowing, what kind of opportunities they can bring to you later on. Or maybe they can even make you meet your future, I don't know, husband or wife.
Titled Reflecting on Shipping My First Game, Highguard. This post would prove to be a disaster. The developer in question would get brigaded and bombarded with some very harsh words, turning a very bad situation even uglier. And it would mainly be due to a couple of paragraphs that I'll read out to you, and, well, you can make up your own mind. He'd say that the game had unbiased internal pre-reveal feedback, and it was quite positive. When it was negative, it was constructive and often actionable, indicating that there was, as far as they were concerned, nothing wrong with the game. He'd then continue, but then the trailer came out, and it was all downhill from there. Content creators love to point out the bias in folks who give positive reviews after being flown out for an event, but ignore the fact that when their negative-leaning content gets 10 times the engagement of the positive, they've got just as much incentive to lean into a disingenuous direction, whether consciously or not. The hate started immediately. In addition to dogpiling on the trailer, I personally came under fire due to my naivete on Twitter, which almost all of my now former coworkers had learned to avoid during their previous game launches, he explained. After setting my Twitter account to private to protect my sanity, many content creators made—
Yeah, that's why you should never give vouches that hard, though. Even for somebody, like, even if I'm vouching for somebody to bring into a job, I won't vouch that hard. I'll be like, here's this person, this is what they do. You talk to them and see if they're okay for the job, because if they do something bad or they fuck up, then that's on you.
videos and posts about me and my cowardice, amassing millions of views and inadvertently sending hundreds of angry gamers into my replies. They laughed at me for being proud of the game, told me to get out the McDonald's applications, and mocked me for listing having autism in my bio, which they seemed to think was evidence the game would be woke trash. All of this was very emotionally taxing. He would then acknowledge that there's much constructive criticism about the trailer, marketing, and launch, but also isn't sure if things would have been better had the game not been announced at the Game Awards. He would then say, "We were turned into a joke from minute one, largely due to the false assumptions about $1 million ad placement, which even prominent journalists soon began to state as fact. Within minutes, it was decided this game was dead on arrival, and creators had free ragebait content for a month. Every one of our videos on social media got downvoted to hell. Comment sections were flooded with copy-paste meme phrases such as Concord 2 and Titanfall 3 died for this. At launch, we received over 14,000 review bombs from users with less than an hour of playtime. Many didn't even finish the required tutorial." He'd finish this by saying, "If this pattern continues, all that will be left are corporations, at least in the multiplayer space. Innovation is on life support. Even if Highguard had a rocky launch, our independent, self-published, dev-led studio full of passionate people just trying to make a fun game with zero AI and zero corporate oversight deserved better than this. We deserve the bare minimum of not having our downfall be gleefully manifested." Barely a couple of days after this article would come out on Twitter, this developer would end up deleting his account. For many of his loudest haters, this article he wrote was nothing more than him playing the victim, blaming gamers, blaming content creators, blaming pretty much anyone except maybe himself and the game developers that made this game that seemingly no one asked for. On the other hand, though, one can understand his frustration. He had worked for almost 3 years on a game, finally revealed it, and within the span of a month, his whole life fell apart. I don't know what he was—
Yeah, but that's the thing though, the internet isn't fair, and the people that are laughing at your downfall, they don't care if you're feeling sad about it. It's kind of like when I made that Twitter post, you know? The schizos don't care. All you're doing is, fueling the negative cycle. And although I did get a lot of support, I think you should. I still regretted it. Not because of the public reception or anything. I don't care about that. Just because in my own rules, I know you should never show weakness or vulnerability online. You are not allowed. And anyway, at this point, he's not convincing anybody because the narrative has already been built, and trying to go against people that already have this narrative about your game, changing it is an uphill battle. It's almost impossible. They won't change their mind.
Was hoping to do with this article, but in the end, as we can see, his account was gone. But that was the least of his worries and the least of many other people's worries when it came to Highguard. That's because barely a day after the mass layoffs would happen, Highguard's website, when you'd go to it, would say, "Site unavailable. This site is currently unavailable. Please contact some email for assistance." Under that, you would see a link to their Discord server and their Twitter profile. Now, the Twitter link worked. The Discord link, on the other hand, did not. In fact, when you would click on it, it would redirect you to a completely different and unrelated Discord server by the name of Highguard Gaming Guild. This had nothing to do with the game. It was just called Highguard.
With 130 members only?
They didn't even bother posting the right server in that link. Additionally, as this was all happening, Highguard couldn't even be found as a YouTube category anymore. Usually when you upload a video of a game, you can very easily label it. Let's say League of Legends or Call of Duty. Highguard had a category, but it was removed. And during all this, someone would ask in the correct Highguard Discord server, what's up with the website being updated? And someone from the Highguard team would say, not sure on the time frame, but basically it needs to be transferred and simplified. Low priority at the moment, reputational damage already done. Now we just need to focus on delivering updates and content to improve. Now look, I already know what you're thinking. Mujin, this is a catastrophe. This is a disaster. What the hell is happening? Oh yeah, it is. You're completely right about that. But here's the thing. It's about to get a million times worse. Remember how Geoff had introduced Highguard's developer? Here are his exact words. This is how he described them.
The power of independent, self-published studios to push the
Independent, self-published studios. Earlier than this, during this clip, he would also call them independent, indie. Hell, even the employee who had written that article before deleting his account would refer to them the same exact way.
Wait, don't tell me it wasn't an indie game. So it wasn't? I think a lot of indie games can do well. But again, I feel like, okay, I feel like the problem with that game is that, or what people are saying, I didn't play it, but from what I'm gathering from this video is that it had no direction. You can have a very simple game, but if it has like good direction and good artistic direction, that's all you need.
Independent self-published studio. We were under the impression this studio was independent, self-funded. This is what everyone was saying. However, on February 17th, 2026, the same day their website would go down, the games journalist Stefan Totillo would drop a bombshell saying, sources, Tencent secretly funded struggling shooter Highguard. Wildlight Entertainment has said for years it was fully funded, but not shared detail. Stephen's article would go into specifics, saying that it wasn't Tencent, the Chinese entity that directly funded them, it was done through a subsidiary, Timmy, saying sources familiar with the Tencent Wildlight connection said that Tencent studio group Timmy was the group backing Wildlight. They did not specify to GameFile the reason for the secrecy about the agreement, nor did they share the scale. It's unclear if or when the funding ended and how that relates to last week's layoffs. Wildlight has been technically independent and not part of Timmy. Timmy/Tencent are massive players in gaming, and yes, they are. I've mentioned them on this channel already. One can't forget that Tencent Games owns Honor of Kings, the highest grossing mobile game of all time ever in the history of humanity, sitting at $18.6 billion, making even more money than Candy Crush Saga. Let's also.
But don't they own also Blizzard? The mechanics are just all nailed together from the games, didn't work together. Yeah, and the graphics are all over the place. No? Am I thinking of another company?
Not forget that they own 40% of Epic Games as well as
Oh, sorry, it's Activision. Wait, it's owned by Microsoft since when? Oh, they own Riot. Oh, yeah. Microsoft owns Blizzard. Tencent owns Riot. Dude, I feel like, yeah, and every company that Tencent gets their fingers on gets like I think it goes to shit.
100% of Riot Games, the creators of League of Legends. This, of course, dealt an even bigger blow to Highguard's already dwindling reputation.
I like that I said that. It was literally on the screen. Like, he literally says it a second later. I did not look at the screen. I just looked at chat. My bad.
That was down in the gutter. People felt like they were lying about their whole independent self-published status. And while we don't have a specific number as to how much Tencent could have funded the studio with, some people have been floating around the idea that it was over $200 million. And saying that the studio was technically founded in 2021, announced in 2023, and had its first game launched in 2026, those many years of development could very easily span tens of millions of dollars. But look, Highguard was already in the shitter, okay? They had laid off most of their staff. I mean, come on, this was going to be dead. This was truly going to be Concord 2. The person suffering from this Tencent connection was Geoff Keighley. Now, there was a conspiracy. Maybe Geoff wasn't doing this because his family was held hostage or out of the goodness of his heart. There was again a third possibility in the mix. He was doing this for real financial incentive because Tencent and Geoff Keighley maintain a long-standing strategic partnership focused on expanding the global reach of the Game Awards and other gaming events. Since 2016, this collaboration has facilitated the show's distribution in China. And one can see that the senior vice president of Tencent, Xiaoyi Ma, is sitting on the advisory board of the Game Awards. So by February 19th,
oh my god, the plot thickens.
Geoff's posts on Twitter, in which he would talk about things unrelated to Highguard, would have questions about this. Are you secretly funded by Tencent? Were you pressured by Tencent to make these posts about Highguard? What's going on exactly? This studio is about to completely close its doors. The game was very mid. You must have been lying that you had fun, right? But still, layoffs aside, Tencent aside, flop and impending doom aside, Highguard would continue to patch and update the game, releasing multiple updates, one on February 19th, as well as one on February 26th.
Sean Hades, thank you so much for the raid. Welcome, welcome, raiders. Take a seat. We're watching a video on the disastrous downfall of Highguard.
Releasing new game modes, new weapon balance patches. And while that was admirable, by February 26th, the game was down to 611 players on Steam. In exactly 1 month since release, the game had gone from 100,000 players to 611 players. The majority had left and no one was coming back. At this point, the writing was on the wall. It was clear as day. This studio, this game, they weren't going to last. And so on March 3rd, 2026, the official Highguard account would post an article saying, Highguard's final update arriving soon. Thank you for playing with us. In which they would say, more specifically, today we're sharing difficult news. We have made the decision to permanently shut down
Tyram21, thank you so much for the raid. Welcome aboard. Welcome, welcome. Thank you.
Highguard on March 12th. Since launch, more than 2 million players stepped into Highguard's world. You shared feedback, created content, and many believed in what we were building. For that, we are deeply grateful. They would then go on to say, the team is excited to release one final game update to enjoy in the remaining life of the game. We'll be adding a new warden, a new weapon, account level progression, and skill trees. Full patch notes are coming, and we're targeting tonight or tomorrow morning for patch release. From all of us at Wildlight, thank you for playing, for supporting us, and for being part of Highguard's story. This article would have over 8 million views, 4,100 replies. And while some were disappointed or shocked that this had happened, many were expecting it, maybe even gloating about it. From the get-go, this game was nothing more than a self-fulfilling prophecy of being Concord 2, and they had just shut down in under 2 months. But how did this even happen? How do you get the backing of Geoff Keighley? How do you get the most prestigious slot in the Game Awards show with over 1 million viewers? How do you get financial backing from one of, if not the biggest gaming company in the world? How do you get very talented developers that worked on nothing but blockbuster games and still managed to fail so miserably? Well, now we know. And it's even messier than we could have ever imagined. Respawn Entertainment is a studio owned by EA. Their first breakout hit was Titanfall, releasing in 2014 and garnering many positive reviews. I personally loved playing it when it came out. It was really, really cool and innovative. Some years would pass by, and they would then release Titanfall 2. This game was not only well received for its multiplayer aspect, but it had something the first game didn't, a single-player campaign. And that was absolutely loved by so many. And even though people were expecting them to maybe work on Titanfall 3, they ended up doing something very unexpected. Shadow dropping a game in 2019 with zero marketing, zero announcement, just saying, hey, it's out, called Apex Legends.
And that
a battle royale
worked?
game that garnered a lot of success. The late co-founder of Respawn Entertainment would tweet out, "I'm so overwhelmed right now. Play Apex broke 1 million unique players in under 8 hours. And after the first day would pass by, it would have reached 2.5 million players. This is a game that had zero marketing. To many, this is how a game should launch from now on. All games should launch like this. Like, yo, we just dropped this game, play it. No announcements months prior or years prior. This was genius, and it was free. So it's no surprise that in just a few years, by 2024, this game would have made over $3.4 billion. And again, I really have to emphasize this game had no marketing. Grand Theft Auto 5 had spent $100 million on marketing alone. So of course, everyone in the gaming industry wanted to know, how did you guys do?
Yeah, but was it during COVID? And also the shooters were really popular then.
This? How did this surprise launch even come to be? When did you even start working on this game? And this is what one of the developers would say. The way we work is by finding the fun. We don't have a game director who sits down and writes up a 500-page Bible. We're like a really poorly trained dog on a walk. We just kind of sniff around, let's follow our nose wherever we go, whatever's fun, we'll go a bit deeper, rub our nose in it, roll around in that a little bit. So this had happened in mid-2017 after the post-launch support for Titanfall 2 would end. They didn't really know what to do, and they just started messing with prototypes. Some of the developers at the time were interested in making a battle royale game. They would put together some prototypes, and very quickly it became very fun. And the rest is history. And so by the time Apex Legends had made billions of dollars, some people at Respawn felt, you know what? We could do this again, but this time on our own terms, and would leave to create Wildlight Entertainment. In fact, here was their exact reasoning from a Bloomberg article. Back in January 2026, Dusty Welch, the co-founder and CEO of Wildlight Entertainment, would tell Bloomberg, yeah, we left Respawn because things were getting a bit too locked up. There was no more freedom. We couldn't just do whatever we wanted like we used to. However, in this article from the end of February 2026, we'd see another reason. One could say the main reason. It would say, in 2019, they had released Apex Legends, a battle royale shooter in which dozens of players fight across a giant map. The game proved to be a massive success, generating more than $3 billion in revenue. Yet as sales piled up, some of the creatives who'd worked on it felt unhappy that they weren't benefiting enough from the resulting windfall. According to people familiar with what happened, who asked not to be identified discussing non-public information, the Wildlight founders decided to do things differently. One of their plans was to set up a profit-sharing program so that if the studio did deliver another big success, everyone would benefit. An enticing setup that ultimately helped Welch and his co-founders attract many of their former Respawn colleagues to the new company. Armed with a significant amount of funding from Tencent Holdings Ltd.
And then it flopped that hard. Shit. That's kind of sad. That makes me feel bad for the devs. They were like, yo, okay, we can recreate this success, and if it goes well, this time I'll have a share of the profit sale. So they left, they do this new studio, and then rest in peace. But I kind of want to know why it flopped that hard.
Wildlight began hiring employees and making plans for its first game. The founders knew they wanted to make another multiplayer shooter, but they hoped to avoid the crowded battle royale market. So instead, they looked to Rust, a survival game in which players can raid enemy bases and build their own. They began constructing levels and designing mechanics for what was envisioned as a survival-focused shooter. 2 years into development, the team realized that the design wasn't working, in part because the amount of freedom conflicted with their goals for highly competitive play, according to people familiar with the events. Also, the scope was too big. Still, some parts were salvageable. The base raiding aspect of the survival game in particular seemed worth keeping. In January 2024, the team pivoted to what would become Highguard, a raid shooter that streamlined many of the survival aspects into a faster, more competitive game. So this is kind of starting to make more sense, right? The idea of why the game felt like you were playing this Frankenstein creation of multiple aspects mashed up together. Look, the dog sniffing phase that Respawn Entertainment used is very important. Let's not forget that Call of Duty Zombies was made by just a few people messing around in the office. But you also need a proper scope. You can't just do whatever you want, however you want, with unlimited money. They had also failed to understand what made Rust special. Base rating was intense because of what was at stake. You couldn't rush it down to under an hour. The same feelings wouldn't be there. It would just be tedious. They had essentially made a game with no demographic. If you wanted base building, you'd play Rust. If you wanted Battle Royale, you'd play Apex Legends. One really interesting thing the Bloomberg article would also...
Man, it reminds me of a game that I really like playing, like Eternal Returns, Black Survival, which was like a Battle Royale MOBA, like top-down MOBA crafting game. It was very niche. That game, it was fun though. It was actually really fun. Never found its footing. Never. It's always been a fucking dwindling fan base. The graphics, the anime girls in there, the waifus look so good. Sucks. But yeah, it suffered from the same problems. It tried to be too many things at once. This is why. Shut up. I know there's food, but I don't have utensils, so I can't give you any, and I'm also gonna have to wait. So, and also what I appreciate about Final Fantasy is that they were just like, you know what? Yeah, the game we made, it's trash. We spent millions on it. We're sorry. We're sorry, audience. Here's one final raid, and we're redoing the game from scratch.
Mentioned was when asked what they thought went wrong, several former Wildlight developers used the word hubris, a belief by the company.
Okay, whenever there's food around, I get bullied by my dog, man, non-stop. I live under the tyranny of my dog.
Company's leadership that they could emulate what had worked in the past with Apex Legends. No matter how much the gaming landscape had changed since then, after all, they'd made one of the last decade's biggest hits. This hubris stemmed from the fact they were so confident this game was good, they were going to shadow drop it again, just like Apex Legends, knowing that the game could hold up for itself. However, after Geoff Keighley had played during their playtest, he approached the development team, he approached the co-founder, who was his friend, and told them, hey, I love the game, I want to highlight it during the Game Awards, since you guys are an independent studio. The co-founder would say he came into the studio and played the game, I think, twice, and he said, guys, can I propose to you? I want to do something that's unique. I want to put it in this spot and kind of do something different and bring this to the world. Welch would say, and that wasn't our plan, but like, are we going to turn down the exposure? Who would turn that down? And then you'd have Chad Grenier chime in too, the ex-creative director of Apex Legends and the head of the studio of Wildlight, saying, so we rushed a trailer together. I wish the reception had been better, but in hindsight, we made a trailer to entertain really quickly and didn't show the gameplay loop and was different and unique. They would then take the exact same approach as Apex Legends. No real marketing until release, and then a massive social media campaign with influencers, streamers, content creators, you name it. Problem is though, during the silence and during the time in which people were calling this game Concord 2.0, the morale of the team was hit pretty badly. They couldn't say anything and they were watching people pretty much tear into something they've worked on for 3 years. Barely a month after the game had come out, the layoffs would begin. It would be held online on a Zoom call since the studio worked remotely, and they'd pretty much announce, yeah, the funding was entirely pulled from the studio. The 100-person team had over 80% of it laid off that same day. By the time Eurogamer's report on February 27, 2026 would come out, there were less than 20 people still working at the studio, doing their best to release updates before the eventual shutdown on March 12th. On March 3rd, Highguard would announce to the world that it was shutting down on March 12th, and shortly after that, you would start seeing way more posts posted on LinkedIn from previous workers at Wildlight talking about the fact that this game was shutting down and how, well, they were looking for a job, saying things like, we swung for the fences in a saturated market and made something genuinely new that we loved to play. Even the studio head, Chad Grenier, would make a post starting it off with, Highguard didn't need to become the next Apex-sized hit to succeed. We weren't chasing that scale. What we needed was a smaller but stable and sustainable player base, and ultimately we weren't able to find it. That's interesting because I would argue a smaller but stable and sustainable player base would be around maybe 2,000 players, a few thousands, let's say. But let's remember that by the time they had reached 2,000 or so players on Steam, they conducted the mass layoffs. That's without counting the players on consoles. So this really begs the question, What was the studio even hoping to achieve? Did they really think they'd have over 10,000 players within a week if it wasn't for the Game Awards? This whole thing reeks of mismanagement and hubris.
I mean, I feel, what does hubris mean? I feel like if they had Tencent investors in this, they were definitely looking for fucking large scale stuff. They worked on big blockbuster hits. They were hoping for that scale. Only 30 devs for Expedition 33. There you go.
Incredible. He would then go on to say how proud he is of the journey of his team and that he had learned a lot throughout all of it. At the same time, though, you'd also find him on Twitter saying something that was very interesting. You see, someone would quote tweet the closure announcement of Highguard, saying, "People don't praise failure, but it's the foundation of every success, nothing but love for wildlife." To which someone would reply with, "It's just baffling to me they released the game in such a skeleton state and decided now's the time to add account levels and introduce some sort of skill tree system. It's crazy to see the parallels between this game failing and seeing Marathon come back after so many tests." This is when the studio head, Chad Grenier, would say, "When you're out of time and money, you have to release a game with the runway you have available and hope players will stick with you post-launch." Now that definitely didn't give off the same tone that his LinkedIn post did. Hell, I'm even baffled why you would want to even admit this, you know? You had close to 4 years of development, and this was the best you could do? The more we learn about this game, the more we understand this was mismanagement. They were fully funded and got way too confident about that. But
I think when you got too much money, you're not being careful with it. You start just spending it on stupid stuff. Yeah, it's mismanagement at the end of the day.
Development and management issues aside, some people would spark up discussions about the art direction of this game and the missed potential. Many of the employees who worked on this game artistically would start posting much of the work on websites like ArtStation, showcasing it in their portfolio. One thing that people would find is this very interesting character concept, being absolutely baffled as to why this wasn't included in the game's release, instead including some way more boring designs. At the same time, the artist Kasaragul would make a very interesting long post about the art direction of this game and why it was baffling, how none of it really made sense, it didn't mesh well together. Some people also argued that because much of the game's art was outsourced to different studios and people outside of the studio itself, the outsourcing team as well as the art director failed to keep cohesion, which resulted in not just the gameplay itself feeling like some sort of Frankenstein creation, but also its entire art direction. The entire thing was mismanaged to hell from day one. It was a tragedy. And with that,
when we did dive into the anime industry, a lot of those artists and freelancers are hired remotely, and it's pain to make them like meet deadlines and to make them work on the same project.
I actually want to mention a quote from Gabe Newell. This is drawn from the article by Geoff Keighley detailing the development of Half-Life 2. The team at Valve wanted Gabe Newell to greenlight Half-Life 2's development. It was actually very hard to do that because their proof of concept just wasn't good enough for him for a while. Of course, there was the argument, well, why can't Gabe just finance it? I mean, come on, you know, like what's stopping him? He has the money for it. And this is when this paragraph comes along saying, true, but most game developers also aren't in Valve's position, where Newell has enough money to fund a game's development out of his pocket if he so pleases. So is it really fair to hold other developers to the same standards as Valve? Ask Newell this question and he grows agitated. Any developer who bitches about, oh, our publisher cut off our money, or the publisher made us ship the game early, doesn't get it, he says. That's the interesting problem you have to solve as a developer. If you don't, well, you'll be perpetually screwed. But how do you solve the problem? Newell cites the development of Counter-Strike, where a young college kid in Vancouver made a Half-Life add-on as a prime example. You bootstrap, Newell suggests. The Counter-Strike guys didn't have some sugar daddy show up and drop a huge wad of cash in their lap. You have to be creative.
Yeah,
this was
kind of what I was gonna say.
Back in 2002. And today in 2026, it could not ring more true. Concord had a sugar daddy. Their name was Sony. $400 million. Look where that got them. The game sucked. Period. You want funding? How about you make a game first, a proof of concept that's actually fun? When it comes to the world leaderboard of any percent speedruns of shutting down after release, Highguard now sits at 4th place behind the Culling 2, Concord, and Crucible at 45 days. The Twitter...
Yeah, I remember watching like a masterclass from a famous director, and he said like the number one thing is no matter what, you have to respect the budget. And he says, what made me a good director is that I knew a little bit about each department to know if the money invested in each department was like it made sense. So I oversaw everything. So for example, he saw that one department was like, ordering all of these costumes and like $1,000, $1,000, $1,000. He stopped it right there. He's like, yo, we don't need all that. Every single thing that we do, it needs to go somewhere else. Like, it needs to be used. We can't just spend money like this. It's a tough reality, but you do have to be good with money. It's not even in creative jobs. You have to pay attention. You can't just bleed out stuff here and there because it adds up.
Count poorly aged things would quote tweet Geoff Keighley's GIF saying, in 48 hours I'll be accepting your apologies, saying, I'm sorry, Geoff. To which Geoff would reply with a shocked image of that same grandpa in the GIF. I mean, in the movie itself, he would
Isn't that the guy from Jurassic Park? I don't know. Am I
say this and then he would be proven wrong. So it was very ironic. At least he was playing into the joke. But some people would be very weird about this and would photograph Geoff on Rodeo Drive in Los Angeles and say that this was him a day after Highguard announced the studio shutting down. I don't know why you got to take a picture of him IRL for this, but what do I expect from people at this point? Some would even argue that Geoff actually needs to take a level of accountability for the game shutting down. But personally, I think if you have common sense, you'd understand that he actually did them a huge favor here, assuming he genuinely did this out of the goodness of his own heart. The game would have definitely launched with maybe like 10k concurrence instead of 100,000 on PC. Additionally, 2 million people tried it, and the majority didn't leave because the internet made them, okay?
Yeah, that's kind of why I'm pissed at like games like Civilization and stuff, for example, because they launch and the base game itself isn't that good. It's only with all the DLCs added on later that it's good. And it's so fucking expensive.
Sassy makes a great point here. Marketing can only get you to try a game. It can't get you to stay on the game if it's not fun, and Highguard simply was not fun. It was weird. And at this point, it seems like every year we're seeing yet another disaster story.
I was just thinking of Sims 4. I'm glad you guys brought it up. Sims is like, that's why I never paid for any single Sims, because fuck them. It's so fucking expensive.
That is similar to Concord, a game that no one asked for, that had a big budget, that had very talented people working on it, and somehow, some way, it was worked on for years without anyone thinking, wait a second, are we really about to do this? I don't know, man. All I know is that the gaming industry is in a very rough spot right now. It's almost impossible to find a job. AI isn't even to blame for this.
Yeah.
Executives have no idea what players actually want, and if they do, they're always late on it. And seeing that they never actually suffer the consequences directly, their employees do, they have no incentive to actually learn from their mistakes. If you want to make games, make them. But make something that people want to actually play. And don't ask for sugar daddy money. Make a playable game first, then pitch it, and then get your funding. Otherwise, you'll end up like Concord, like Highguard, and God knows whatever else is going to release soon that will face the same fate. Thank you so much for watching this video until the very end. I really hope you enjoyed it. I love you so much platonically. I missed you. Make sure to check out my Stacked page if you want to see exclusive content of me with videos, both short and long, yapping. And I'll see you in the next video, whenever that is, hopefully soon. Take care,
Nice.
and mwah.
Hey guys, Highguard coming on Gen 26, by the way. Hey guys, Highguard shutting down on March 13th, by the way. Great fucking video. When Sims 4 came out, he couldn't even make a pool, which was feature in all the previous 3 games. I don't even play hero shooters. I'm just eating popcorn watching. Yeah, me neither. My Overwatch days are over. Well, it's become, the thing is now, I feel like they're getting lazy with it because it's become generally accepted that a game will never release fully finished. And they're kind of using their player base to test it for them. Total Warhammer needs DLCs from 3 separate games? How can that be? I feel like we keep lowering the standards, and yeah, that's what happens. Hey, you! Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that bell button, and I'll see you in the next video.